Hey, welcome all you wiretappers out there. It's good to be back here in the studio of Gangland Wire. This is Gary Jenkins. You know, I'm a retired Kansas City Police Intelligence Unit detective turned podcaster. And this has been fun, guys. This is so much fun. And I've gotten to know some great people doing this over the last several years. And one of them is Michael Vecchione. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you very much, Gary. I appreciate you having me back on. I love talking to you and talking to your audience.
Yeah, you know what's interesting? Like Michael and I kind of speak the same language in many ways because he was a prosecutor in the Brooklyn. You were the chief of the Brooklyn Rackets Division, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, before that I was chief of the Homicide Bureau as well, and so I kind of had my hand in almost everything that went on in the DA's office when I was there. So it was a very interesting experience, I got to tell you, Gary.
I can imagine. You know, Michael knows where all the bodies are buried in Brooklyn, political and really.
You know, it's interesting you say that because the guy we're going to talk about, Gaspipe Casso, when I spoke to him, gave me some locations for bodies, but we'll get into that when I tell you the story. So.
Really, let's talk just a little bit about Michael and his books. First of all, guys, we got a self-stop here, you know, and you'll be interested in these books. He was on here before with Luigi the Zip. Homicide is My Business, and that was a big seller at least for me, and I think it was for Michael too. And he interviewed this guy who was a Sicilian who did a bunch of hits here, who just liked Michael, if I remember right. That was a great show, Michael.
Thank you. Yeah, it was. Luigi was a character that I will never forget. I have to tell you.
I'll have links to all these and to Amazon in the show notes, guys. We had Crooked Brooklyn. I think we talked about that one. And we did we do Murder on the Bridge? I can't remember. We did the one about people were getting killed in a hospital.
Oh, that was Behind the Murder Curtain.
Oh, okay, Behind the Murder
Curtain. Yeah. And Murder on the Bridge it was a case that I did, and it's actually part of the novel series that I'm now working on. I made it into I fictionalized it, but it started out as it was a young woman who was walking the Williamsburg Bridge between Manhattan and Brooklyn for exercise, and she was set upon one Sunday morning by a junkie who wound up killing her after she didn't have any money. That he wanted money and she didn't have any. He killed her and made it seem as if it was a sex crime, and then went back later that night and burnt her body to beyond recognition. So it was a very, very important case to the district attorney when I got it, because it involved a community that had a lot of votes in it. You know, the Hasidic Jewish community in Brooklyn is huge, and this young lady was the victim of this guy that I called. And if you don't mind, I could just tell you a little bit. When I tried the case and I summed up, the case was so horrific in what he did to this young woman that all was left on the bridge where she was found was a shoe and her bra clasp. And the only way that we identified her was through dental records. It was just horrific. And when I summed up, I essentially told the jury that it was as if the devil had come to Brooklyn and committed this crime. And that gave me an idea for later on in my life, and I'm in the midst of it now, of a crime novel series, which I call Fallen Angel. And the premise is that the devil does come to Brooklyn, and he is behind and instigating horrific crimes that need to be taken to the perpetrators need to be brought to justice. And the government forms this committee, this group, to concentrate on bringing the devil and his minions to justice. And they hire a prosecutor, and the prosecutor happens to be the retired district attorney, the head of the Rackets Division in the DA's office. So the books of Fallen Angel, book 1 and 2 are now on Amazon. And I've just turned in book 3. It'll be out in the fall. So I think that your listeners and your viewers will really like it, will really enjoy it, because all of the cases, all of the crimes in the book, that is part of a novel, but all of them actually happened. And I handled every single one of them when I was in a DA's office. So that's the spin. And it's been very, very well received. I sold book 1 to Hollywood, and I'm hanging on now, waiting to hear.
Yeah.
We have a pilot written, and so anyway, that's a little bit about what I am doing at the moment, and now talking to you. So.
All right. And what we're going to talk about is your other book that you did with the retired New York City detective Tommy Days called Friends of the Family.
Right. Right.
And we're going to not so much talk about the two, what we call mafia cops, I believe, Coppa and what was the other guy's name?
Eppolito.
Eppolito. Yeah. He was the one that was in Goodfellas, I believe. Those were a couple of characters to us for sure. But we're going to talk about Gaspipe Casso, who was their kind of control, would you say?
Well, yeah, he controlled them. He actually called them his crystal ball, because when he needed information about informants or needed something taken care of by them going into the police computer and getting information, he had an intermediary who he would go to, and that intermediary would go to the mafia cops, and they would provide the information. They'd give him the information about who the rats were, who the informants were, and on at least one occasion they actually did a murder on his behalf. So those two guys were quite a pair. I mean, it was, and they're both, by the way, now deceased. So we can talk about them.
Well, they were both in jail when they did get deceased, weren't they?
Yep. They did life. They got life in prison. They both died in jail, and it was, as my boss, the district attorney, called it when we had our press conference, it was the most horrific case of corruption in the history of the New York City Police Department.
Yeah.
And it was.
I would say in the history of the United States, it was the most horrific case of corruption by law enforcement, for sure.
And
I don't know any worse.
Gaspipe was right in the center. But Gary, I got to tell you, before they went to work for Gaspipe, they were working for someone in the Gambino family.
Oh, really?
And there was a falling out. The Gambinos did something to, I think it was the cousin of Eppolito. And when that happened, he said that he's not going to do anything for them anymore. And Gaspipe was looking for someone like them, somebody he could turn, someone he could lean on. And the intermediary that he went to was a guy named Bert Kaplan, who had been the intermediary between the mafia cops and the Gambinos. And he talked Gaspipe into getting these guys on board, and it was a marriage made in hell, not in heaven, in hell. So
really, yeah. And which brings us to Anthony Gaspipe Casso, a bad dude. Started out in the Lucchese family, spent his entire career in the Lucchese family. I can't remember, how high did he get? Of course, he had his own crew.
He was the underboss.
Okay.
He was a consigliere. He was a underboss. And at the time that he and the boss, a guy by the name of Al DiArco, went out on the land because they got word through the mafia cops and through their network that Gaspipe was and DiArco were on a list to be arrested, they took off. So yeah, he was an underboss, but he was a vicious guy, so bad that the federal prosecutors, when they arrested him and turned him and he became a witness, they called him Lucifer. That's how bad a guy he was. That was their nickname for him. So
really,
yeah.
Now, the feds, of course, turned him because they've always got the big stick. But he reached out to you, or you reached out to him. I'm not sure. Tell us about that. You ended up talking to him after he went. He turned.
I did. So in the midst of the mafia cops case, I knew we needed someone on the inside. We had some information, tangential information. Things were going along very well in the investigation, but I knew that if I was going to take the case to trial, and what we were concentrating on, Gary, was one murder that they were involved in. And I have to give you a little bit of the background as to why this particular guy was a target of Gaspipe's. Back when Paul Castellano was the head of the Gambino family, Castellano replaced Carlo Gambino as the boss of the family. And as you probably know, because you know the history of these guys as well as I do, and probably better, Castellano was assassinated on the street in front of a steak restaurant in Manhattan, orchestrated by John Gotti and Sammy Gravano. The whole point of the plot was for Gotti to take over and become the boss of the Gambino family. So they did that. They set up the hit, and Castellano was killed along with his driver. But it was an unsanctioned hit. It was not sanctioned by the other family bosses. And that kind of set off both Gaspipe and Vincent the Chin Gigante, who was the head of the Genovese family. And they decided that John Gotti had to be killed because of what he did. So Gaspipe recruits. Gaspipe knew that every Sunday, Gotti would go to a particular social club in Brooklyn for whatever, I guess to collect money, to meet with people in the family, that kind of thing. And so he recruited believe it or not, a musician, a munitions expert, a bomb expert that he knew who was in the army and was a bomb maker. And he was also a wise guy. So the plan was for this bomb maker to make a bomb, sort of like an IED, a flat kind of bomb. And the plan was for the bomb maker to meet in this spot in Brooklyn on a Sunday morning. And Gaspipe was going to walk past the car that was going to be the car that they were going to blow up, because Gotti arrived and left in a car. So he tells me the story about how he was walking down the street, a paper bag with what looked to be groceries and Italian bread sticking out and things of that nature, like, Sunday morning and I'm shopping and that kind of thing. And as he gets to the car, he bends down and he puts the IED under the car. So now it's all set. He takes off, goes around the corner and waits. The bomb maker who's going to set the bomb off is across it was a two-way street. So it was a long distance between where he was and where the car was. So instead, and he was going to set the bomb off with a remote device. So instead of doing it from across the street where his car was, this moron takes his car, makes a U-turn, and pulls up next to the car where these two guys get in. And one of them he believes is Gotti, and the other is his driver, Frankie DeCicco. And he pulls up next to the car, sets it off, and blows the car up. Now, the idiot was right next to it, and his car was badly damaged. He takes off, and as it turns out, Gotti was not in the car. Gotti did not go that day. It was someone else. That sets off a chain of events. Gotti now finds out that Gaspipe and Vincent the Chin Gigante were behind this plot to kill him. And since Gigante was a little bit more protected than I guess he felt Gaspipe was, his plot was to kill Gaspipe in revenge for attempting to kill him. And Gaspipe one day is driving his car in Brooklyn, of course, stops at a light, and a car pulls up next to him. 4 guys are in the car. He looks over, doesn't think anything of it, and all 4 of them open fire and shoot Gaspipe and then take off. Gaspipe doesn't die. He's injured. He's injured very badly. He makes his way out of his car, crawls on the street to a Chinese restaurant that was right near the area, goes down to the basement of the Chinese restaurant and waits and calls someone to come and get him. And they get him, bring him to some doctor, and he gets taken care of. Now, Gaspipe now makes it his life's work to find out who those 4 guys were in that car and who was behind the assassination attempt. And he finds out. How does he find out? Well, the Mafia cops help him find out who it was who was in the car. Now, one of the names was a guy named Nicky Guido in that car, one of the people in the car. Gaspipe goes to the Mafia cops. He wants to find out where Nicky Guido lives, because he doesn't recognize the name, doesn't know it. And Caracappa, who was working in, I guess, the organized crime section of Major Case Squad in the NYPD, had access to all of these records. And he puts the name, Nicky Guido, gives a kind of a description and an area where he thinks he came from. And he comes up with a name, comes up with an address. And it's in South Brooklyn, which would be where they thought that this guy lived. And they tell Gaspipe. Gaspipe arranges for this guy, Nicky Guido, to be hit. And it's Christmas morning. And Nicky Guido is out on the street in front of his house with his uncle, showing off to his uncle his brand new car. And a car comes up the block and stops while Guido is in the car with his uncle. And Guido recognizes or sees that they have taken guns at it and now aiming to the car. And he jumps onto his uncle to protect him. They open fire, and Nicky Guido is killed. He saved his uncle. They take off. Turns out it was the wrong Nicky Guido. It wasn't the guy who was in the car who shot at Gaspipe. When the real Nicky Guido finds out what happened, he takes off and goes to California. He's later found in California. So Gaspipe, so that's one mess. That was a miss. He still didn't gab the names of all the others, although he ultimately gets them all. And he found one of the names is a guy by the name of Jimmy Heidel. Heidel was kind of a hanger-on, a guy that was an associate of the Gambino family. Lived, of course, he lived in Staten Island, but he hung out in Brooklyn. And Gaspipe gives the order to the Mafia cops, find this kid and find out what he knows, and ultimately we're going to kill him. So they find out where he go to his home where he lived with his mother in Staten Island, the Mafia cops. And they ring the bell. But before they get to the door, they see a guy who looks like Jimmy Heidel. It turns out it was his brother, Frankie Heidel. They accost him on the street. And they say to Frankie, "You're coming with us?" Frankie says, No, you're looking for my brother. I'm not Jimmy, I'm Frankie. They say, okay, and they leave. They go to the mother now. I'm sorry, Frankie goes into his home and tells his mother what just happened. She goes out onto the street and they're still sitting there. And she goes up to the car and confronts them. What are you doing? What do you want with my kids? That kind of thing. And she sees both. And they say, it's police business, ma'am, stay out of it. We're looking for. So Frankie had told the Mafia cops where he thought his brother might be over in Brooklyn. And they had a connection over there, and they found out that he was in, I think it was either a pool hall or a bowling alley. I forgot. Now, what's important about that is that years later, Mrs. Heidel, first of all, she reports all of this stuff to the FBI, to the police, etc. Nothing happens after her son disappears, Jimmy. And what happened is Jimmy is in Brooklyn, and they find out where he is. And I think, as I said before, I think it was a bowling alley. And he comes out of the bowling alley, and they grab him, the two cops, and they tell him, come with us. He doesn't know what the hell is up. He just thinks that, he's being arrested. It's another bullshit arrest on his part, and gets in the car. They don't drive to any precinct. They drive to a location in Brooklyn, to a parking lot behind it, what used to be a Toys R Us, big Toys R Us store. And there in that parking lot, they transfer him from there to Gaspipe's guys. And the Gaspipe's guys drive him to a house not that far away, down to the basement, where Gaspipe is waiting for him. And Gaspipe tortures the hell out of him. He gives up all of the names in the car, who were in the car. And then Gaspipe kills him. That's what happens. Now, Mrs. Heidel, by the way, never found out until later on what happened to Jimmy. And Frankie Heidel, her other son, was also murdered by a different group for a different reason. And Tommy Dage, the detective who worked on the Mafia cop's case with me, was assigned to that homicide. And he got to know Mrs. Heidel, and the case broke for us when she finally decided to tell Tommy about the visit in Staten Island by the Mafia cops looking for her son. And so we were going to investigate, and we had enough, I believed, to at least open an investigation into the death of Jimmy Heidel. And that's how we were going to go after the Mafia cops, going after this murder case, which carried 25 to life, by the way, Gary, if I convicted him. So the investigation goes on, our investigation goes on, and I get to the point where I say to Tommy, we need somebody else. We need someone on the inside. You know, we knew Kaplan was involved, but Kaplan at that point wasn't talking. He had turned down helping the feds, even though they offered him a deal. He was in jail, by the way, for narcotics violations. So I said, where are we going to go? So it dawned on me one day. I said, let me give it a shot. Maybe Gaspipe will talk to me. So I reach out to his lawyer, and I find out that Gaspipe is in Brooklyn, of all places now, in jail. He's waiting to testify in a federal case, not for the prosecution, but for the defense. So I call the U.S. Attorney's office and I speak to a U.S. attorney and say, listen, you guys have him here. You produced him in case he's needed as a witness. I want to go talk to him, but the federal jail won't let a local prosecutor in. I need your okay to go in and do it. I thought that this was a ground ball. Know what they told me? No, we're not helping you. We're not helping you. So I say, come on. And I'm working on him. In the meantime, I'm speaking to the lawyer because I'm thinking that ultimately I'm going to convince the feds to let me go in to see him. And I do convince the feds at some point to let me go in. So now I'm waiting for the lawyer to give me an answer. Is your guy going to talk to me? I told him I would give him a letter that he cooperated for whatever that was worth. The guy was doing 17 life sentences. So the lawyer finally gets back to me and he says, my guy, I'll let you talk to my guy, but here's what I want. I want immunity for the Jimmy Heidel murder. I said, well, it's a state case. You've got the immunity. What? The guy's doing 17 life sentences. I'm not going to go after him for Jimmy Heidel. I said, no problem. He goes, well, that's not it. Not all. I want the feds to give me immunity because they could fashion some kind of, as he said, bullshit charge for the Jimmy Heidel thing. I said, okay, I'll call the feds. Now, I hadn't spoken to them about this yet, about the immunity stuff yet but they did say that they would have somebody go with me to the jail when I talked to him. But of course, Gaspipe wouldn't talk to me unless they gave him immunity. Once again, Gary, they said to me, no, we're not giving him immunity. I said, are you going to really prosecute this guy? You've already got him for 17 lives. How much more time can the guy get? Gary, it was not that. That was not the reason. You know why they wouldn't allow me to go in to talk to him, or why they wouldn't give me the deal? Because he had written a letter after they convicted John Gotti. Gaspipe had written a letter saying that Sammy Gravano, who was the main witness in the case, was a liar. Lied about this, lied about that. They were concerned that if they gave Gaspipe a deal, that somehow his claims about about Gravano lying in the Gotti case would be used by an attorney to try to overturn the Gotti conviction, because they had convicted Gotti by that point. They said, no, they're not giving me. And they didn't. They were very hard and fast. So I go back to the lawyer and I tell him, I can give you the immunity in state court, but I can't do what I can't do. I can't give you a federal immunity because are not willing to give it to us. Let me talk to him. You got nothing to lose. The answer was no. So I never got to talk to Gaspipe. Gaspipe would have been my witness with all the rest of the things I had in the Heidel case. Anyway, to make a very, very long story short, the feds steal the case from us. They make a RICO case out of the whole thing. And it still sits. Every time I talk about it, my stomach starts to churn, because the feds really, to use a Brooklyn term, really fucked me, Gary. They had no interest in allowing us to do this case, particularly when we made it and started it after the case sat for 10 years. The boxes with this case in it sat for 10 years in a federal courthouse or the U.S. Attorney's office, never touched it. They never had any interest in doing it. In fact, when we started the case, they said to me, go ahead, knock yourself out. We don't give a shit. It's an old case. you're never going to make this. And then when we made it, when we started to make it, now suddenly, oh boy, now we can get this Mafia cops business. And believe it or not, they took all the credit in the world for the case. Wound up convicting him. The first time the case was set aside, by the way, because it was a bogus kind of theory that they used. It was then reversed on appeal, and the conviction stood. So, point with Gaspipe was something that always bothered me. I didn't understand why this guy, who was so willing to talk to the feds when they turned him, wouldn't talk to me, wouldn't even have me visit. He didn't have to commit to anything. Let me just talk to you and see if I can convince you. I couldn't figure that out. I do get the answer, and I get the answer from Gaspipe, and I'll get to that. So I go on, the feds steal the case, they go on, do it, and I begin a case involving an FBI agent, a retired FBI agent who was on the Colombo family payroll, who was providing information to the Colombos through a capo named Scarpa, Greg Scarpa. And Scarpa was providing the FBI agent with information about his, fellow mafiosi. And it was again, a marriage made in hell, quite frankly. And so I'm involved in this investigation. And part of the investigation involves, a major part of the investigation involves Greg Scarpa, who's now dead at that time. But his son, Gregory Scarpa, was alive and in AdMax in Colorado. He was doing life in, not life, he was doing something less than life, but he was doing it in Colorado, the AdMax in Florence, Colorado, the most secure prison in the United States. And I send word through his lawyer that we want to talk to him, tell him that I will give whatever letter they want in terms of cooperation. And his lawyer was very cooperative, a female lawyer, forgot her name. And I get a takeout order from the feds to take out Scarpa and Gregory Scarpa, bring him to New York and have him sit with us as we go through this investigation against this FBI agent, because he was intimately involved with everything his father did, everything. He knew the FBI agent, knew exactly what he had been doing, everything that we needed to make a case. So I brought him in, and literally when he walked into my conference room, the first day the detectives had him and brought him into me, he said, I introduced myself, and he says, hi, you're Mike Vecchione. I said, yep. He said, before I forget, Gaspipe wants you to go see him. I said, Gaspipe? What's going on? He said, Gaspipe is my neighbor down in, he had to sell next to Gregory Scarpa in AdMax. I said, really? What's he want to talk to me about? He said, I don't know. He just knew I was coming to see you. And he told me that when you're done with me, he wants to see you. I said, okay. So I go, we do our case. We do the case involving the FBI agent, and it's over. And I make an appointment to go down to visit Gaspipe. He gave me permission. His lawyer gave me permission. Very strange that the lawyer would allow me at this point to go see him, but he did. He was in Butner, North Carolina, in a prison hospital. So 2 detectives and myself took a trip down to North Carolina. We go into the prison, and the prison authorities had arranged for us to have a room alone. And the detective and myself and one of the correction officers were standing in the room, and we're waiting for another correction officer to bring Gaspipe to the room. And then suddenly, there he is. He walks in. Guys introduce themselves, and then I introduce myself, and he goes, you don't have to. I know who you are. He says to me, a lot of guys in here have your picture on dartboards that they're throwing darts at because of what you've done. I said, what have I done? Done my job. He started to chuckle. So I said to him, did you read the book? Meaning Friends of the Family. He said, yeah, I did. I said, so? He goes, about 95, 96% accurate. He said, I'll take it. So we bring him in, and I say, okay, so here we are. What do you want to talk to me about? So what he was interested in, Gary, was he was looking to find some way for us to go to the federal judge, and tell him how cooperative he was in solving old unsolved homicides that he and the Lucchese's were involved in. He was hoping that that somehow by miracle, I said, Anthony, you're doing 17 life sentences. What am I going to do for you? He goes, you never know. I really would appreciate you doing it. Plus, he says, I've been in here. I'm having, it was like he was trying to tell me that he had some kind of an epiphany, that his whole life is now changed and he wanted to help us. And I said, okay, well, I'll hear what you have to say. I said, but first of all, you're going to tell me about the Mafia cops case. So we talk, and he tells me about how he hooked up with them through Burt Kaplan, why he wanted them, on his payroll, what they did for him. Everything that I knew, Gary, he corroborated and told me was, gave me the imprimatur, so to speak, the Mafia imprimatur. Yeah, that's what happened. So I asked him, I said, listen, why is it that you didn't tell me this when I wanted to talk to you years ago when we were doing the case? He said, Mike, the way I found out that you wanted to talk to me was I read it in your book. My lawyer never told me that you were looking to have me come in and talk to you in the DA's office. He said, if I had known that, I would have been there. I would have come in and talked to you. It was like, I couldn't go back. The lawyer unfortunately has passed away, and I really couldn't do anything to scream at the guy like, you son of a bitch, how could you do that to me? But he said, yep. So he tells me the whole story. And, Gary, I got to say that we were pretty accurate. We were very accurate. He admitted to the screw up with Nicky Guido, and told me all about Burt Kaplan, the guy that was his intermediary. He gave me the whole story and told me, all about his life growing up and how he, started with on the street, little street gang, and then ultimately he wound up becoming, he wasn't a Lucchese to begin with. I think he was in a Gambino family first. And then there was a swap, sort of like a baseball swap, between him and someone else. There was a problem with one of the Gambinos with him. And so he moved over to the Lucchese family. And the one thing that I did find out is he mentioned how he was really upset by people calling him Gaspipe. He hated that name. He hated it. And I found out, I said, well, how did you get it? Where did it come from? He said, people tell me that his father was a wise guy as well, was a collector, a guy who would go around collecting money that was owed to the wise guys. And he broke off one day, a guy was giving him a hard time, and he broke off the tailpipe of a car, and he beat the hell out of the guy with the tailpipe of the car. And his father was not called Gaspipe, but when Anthony, his son, started to come up in the Mafia world, they said that's so-and-so's son, and they started to call him Gaspipe. But he told me he hated it because I think that at some point I was going to mention or call him that, gas or something of that nature, and it was like, no, you don't call me that. My name is Anthony, and Anthony, and other thing is that a lot of people call him Casso. They were always calling him Anthony Casso, cops in particular. He said, my name is Casso, so please call me by my correct name. And that's what we did. So we spent, the first time we were there, we spent about 2 hours or more talking to him. And he started out, told me what he wanted. He wanted my help. He wanted me to write a letter to the federal, parole authority, federal judge, to somehow keep it on record that, he had helped. And I said, okay, I have no problem doing that, but you got to tell me what you're going to give me. I need something. I can't just write a letter if you don't give me anything. So he starts out by telling me about a particular murder that occurred, and he was the one who actually did it. And he gave me this information about what it was. And I got to tell you, Gary, I don't remember exactly the facts of the case, and it's not important because what he said, I said, okay, so first of all, it's only you telling me this. I can't put you on the stand and expect the jury to buy just you, what your background. I said, you got to give me something more. For instance, where's the gun? What'd you do with the gun? He said, I'll tell you. I dropped it into Sheepshead Bay. So are you familiar with what Sheepshead Bay is? Sheepshead Bay is a body of water that's off the Atlantic Ocean in southern Brooklyn, and it's a bay, a big one, and it has boats on it, pleasure boats, etc. And it feeds into the Atlantic. He said, I drove to Sheepshead Bay. He gave me the street. He gave me the spot. He said, I dropped the gun into Sheepshead Bay right there. I said, well, that will help. He said, if you get that gun, you can compare it to the bullets, etc., etc. I said, okay, I'll do that. I said, that's one. What else you got? So now he tells me about another hit that he does. And I said, so what'd you do with the body this time? He says, well, we went down to Carroll Gardens, which is an area where I was living at the time. And on this particular street, he gave me the name of the street, there was a sort of a little storefront kind of warehouse kind of thing. And we dug up the floor, buried the body in the floor or in the wall. I don't remember exactly. And then covered it up. And that's where the body is. I said, you think it's still there? He says, yeah, nobody went to get it. Nobody even knows this, except I'm telling you. But that's where I put the body. I said, okay. I said, you got other information? He gives me other information. Who else was involved, where it happened, that kind of stuff. So anyway, I'm going to skip ahead. So when we went home, I took two detectives. It was right near the office where this location was. And we go down to this spot onto the street. And I look and I say, oh no. I said, this now was the storeroom for one of the best Italian restaurants on Court Street was the name of the street. It's a very, very, very well attended, well liked, delicious food. In the back was their storeroom for where they would keep their, supplies, mozzarella and tomato sauce and all this other stuff. We go in and we find the spot. We knew because he gave us that kind of details to where the body was. It was completely renovated, completely bricked over. I said to the detective, what? We can't take this apart. George Terror was his name. I said, George, what are we going to do? We're going to go in this guy and ask the guy in the restaurant to allow us to, and you know how much it's going to cost us to try to find this body? We're never going to be able to find it. So we abandoned it. So what we did was we went to the NYPD and asked them if they would allow us to use the scuba team to go to Sheepshead Bay to search for the gun. At least maybe we can make that case. Gary, 3 days of diving into Sheepshead Bay by the scuba team. I mean, it was years, 10, 15 years. You know where that gun probably is down now in the middle of the earth. It sinks in. They never found it. So I got to tell you one thing that kind of jogged my memory about breaking up the back of the restaurant. When they killed Jimmy Heidel, they killed him after Gaspipe tortured him. He killed him in the basement of a home that was owned by one of the Lucchese soldiers. So we knew exactly where or what the home was. We knew exactly where they had done it in the basement. We found all of this information out, and I sent guys to the home now to see, we're going to do this case. If we can find even remnants of blood down there, then it corroborates the story that we were getting from our informants, the witnesses that we had who were going to tell us all about this. So we get a search warrant for the house, go down there, and we serve the search warrant on the owner. The owner now is no longer the Lucchese guy. It's some family that owns the place now. But they said, sure, you can go down and look. It's no problem. And if you need to, you can search around to do whatever you have to do. So I get a call. Detective, calls me and said, actually, it was Tommy Dage. Tommy says, Mike, this place is entirely mirrored. Whoever bought the house after, or maybe before, put mirrors up all around the walls of the house. The floor was all covered with brand new flooring. He said, we never are going to be able to find any blood here, but we took some samples of some things that looked like blood from the floor and from the wall, and the medical examiner took it. Never turned out to be enough to find out what we did. But and then finally at the end, when I spoke to Gaspipe at the end of the interview, I said to him, listen, before I leave, you're going to tell me what you did with Jimmy Heidel's body, because Mrs. Heidel deserves to know. He says, yeah, no problem. He says, I'm cooperating. I'm no problem. So he tells me that after they killed Heidel, they needed to dump the body in an area of South Brooklyn. It's now called Georgetown, believe it or not. They were building this entire new development of homes, blocks and blocks of homes, and they were digging up the earth to get ready to lay down the foundation. And they knew one of the bulldozer operators. Gaspipe tells me, yeah, we knew the guy, and we asked them, we bring the body, we asked them if he would allow us to bring it in there, because then he could bury it with the bulldozers. And then the next day, he said, the next day they were going to cement and build the foundation. So the body was dumped, bulldozer dumped the dirt. Next day, this enormous housing development began to be built with the concrete, and that's where Jimmy Heidel's body is. Now, we went home and we told Mrs. Heidel, she was at least grateful for finding out where her son was. She'd never be able to find his body, but that's where it was. And that was as a result of Gaspipe telling me what he did. So we did the investigation to the best we could, and we didn't come up with anything for Gaspipe. But we went back down to talk to him again and told him what the result was. And he started giving us other information. It was another case involving an informant, and it was very difficult, Gary, to make cases based on just the shreds of information that he was giving us. You know better than I do. You can't make cases unless you start to get some concrete information. I remember this happened here, and it was this guy. And we're talking about cases that are 15, 16, 20 years old. There was no way that we were able to do it. So I told him, I promised him, I said, listen, I will, if you want me to, I will send a letter to tell a judge and give it to your lawyer that you did cooperate. You did, attempt to help us solve these unsolved cases, as many as we had. I forgot how many he ultimately gave us. But I can't promise you anything. I can't go to the feds and say, you need to do something to help this guy, and I can't make a case. Anthony, I just can't make a case. So believe it or not, he kind of understood. He was upset, but not to the point of, giving me a hard time. He just said, I tried, I tried. And, it wasn't that long after that, a few years after that he ultimately passed away he had prostate cancer. And that's what he ultimately passed away. But there were two meetings chock full of information. I mean, getting the whole attempt on Gotti's life, the whole story about that. We actually sent detectives to the garage where the bomb maker had driven his car after he did the bomb. Gaspipe said, that car was never moved. It might be still there. He couldn't pinpoint the actual garage that they drove it to, but we were, at least I would have loved to have at least tried to make a case against the bomb maker, because he was still alive. And he just died now too. But at the time he was alive, and I could have made a case against him. And he, but we could never find the car. The problem was that his information was old and difficult to track down. So, but he opened up like he sang like a canary to us, So,
I have
but
to ask Michael, what about his demeanor? Well, what was your impression? Just your kind of gut impression of him, his
very,
aura, if you will.
yeah, he was very calm, very collected, very polite. Talk, with the very heavy, thick Brooklyn accent, but not a madman, not the madman that the feds used to call call Lucifer.
Yeah.
He was a guy that, he had a story to tell and things to say, and and he did. And his demeanor was very calm, and quite frankly, if you didn't know what he was and who he was, you'd say, yeah, guy, very polite, nice guy, and with 30 plus 35 murders under his belt, but maybe more. So, but that was it. There was nothing overt about the guy as far as, giving you a hint of who he was. He seemed to settle in. He was settled into prison life. And actually, I think he probably enjoyed the 2 hours that we were together. It got him out of whatever he was, and it was interesting, an interesting kind of situation. So
yeah, they say guys will try to do anything when he's out there in Ad Max in Florence, Colorado, which is bad. It's a lonely existence. In order to get out and mingling around with other prisoners, as you're then transferred, and then take his handcuffs off and go into a room and get a cup of coffee with people that are not just have a certain amount of freedom.
Absolutely, there's none. I mean, it's an hour out in some other cell where you get to walk around.
Yeah.
Can I tell you one other thing? And it's interesting. When he was a neighbor to Scarpa, I asked both of them, and I asked Scarpa, and I corroborated it with Gaspipe. I said to Scarpa, how did he tell you? Because they don't mingle. They're not, because they were both in segregation. He goes, you got to understand, he was next to me, in the cell next to me. And what we used to do was we would take a toilet paper roll when it was finished, and you put it in the sink. The sinks are all connected, and you blow out whatever water is in there. And if you talk into the toilet paper roll, and the other guy has his toilet paper roll and he has his ear to his, he can understand what we're saying. He can hear me. And later on, I asked Casso the same thing, and he told me exactly the same story. He said, yeah, we talked through the sink. And that was, that was it. That's how they would get messages to each other and discuss what's going on and how things are. And that's how we told them, you're going to see Vecchione, you got to tell him that he's got to come. So
cool.
That's my adventures with Gaspipe.
You just never know what's going to happen. I have a guy, actually, he's a true crime writer in Kansas City. He's got a full-time job as a park ranger out west, but he's originally from Kansas City and wrote a book about Kansas City. And he was checking on some people who were camping illegally at one of the national forests where he was working. And it was Greg Scarpa Jr.'s granddaughter, I believe.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, he has a bunch of granddaughters, bunch of grandkids. I don't know how many granddaughters he has.
Yeah, so. Frank Asker, said, "Are you any kin to him?" Because he's on my podcast group and listens to me and everything, and so he stays up on this. He said, "Oh yeah, that was my grandfather."
I mean, my year with I had Scarpa with me for a year during the time that I needed him and was working with him. That was another whole interesting situation about him and how his father treated him and things of that nature. For another podcast.
Okay. All right. We'll do that. That would be good. You spend a lot of personal time with him.
Oh yeah.
That's hard to find, that kind of firsthand. That's why I ask you the aura of Gaspipe Casso, because you look at his picture, his mugshot, and he does look a little bit like the devil, and that's his reputation.
Yeah, he's a tough guy. No, make no bone. I make no, I don't say that he gave off the idea that he was polite, but you knew that you shouldn't mess with him. That would be the way I would characterize it.
Interesting. It's always interesting that these guys talk as if you and I are talking about golf or something, talking about killing people or hiding bodies and doing something with the body. It's just they're distanced. Personally, they're distanced from that a little bit. It didn't really affect them.
Absolutely.
Crazy. All right. Well, Michael Vecchione, I really appreciate you coming on and telling this story. And guys, don't forget to look down in the show notes for links to his books. He's got several of them, and they're good books. And if you didn't read Luigi the Zip, that's a really interesting story, unknown mob story of New York City. You
Yeah.
think you know everything about New York City Mafia. Read that one. You're going to find out a lot more. And their
Thank
relationship
you.
to Sicilians already. Also, that's another
Yep.
interesting thing is that relationship to Sicilians. I interviewed a guy from Sicily that was connected to the Bonanno family for a while, and it was like, to me, it was interesting because he told the story of somebody that nobody knew anything about. He wasn't really even that much of a criminal. He was a bookie and did a lot of things with them. And it's just, you get this different idea about what that life inside that family is like day to day.
Yeah.
And Luigi
Well,
the Zip, he did that.
Luigi was in it, boy, that's for sure.
All right.
So, thank you, Gary. I really appreciate the time, and thank you for the ads for my books. I really hope that your listeners and readers, I'm sorry, and your viewers will go to them. I think that they'll enjoy them.
All right. Thank you, Michael.
Have a good one.
All right. Talk to you later. Well, guys, that was great. I really like Michael Vecchione. I really hope we'll do some more with him, and I hope he continues to do more and he has greater success because he spent his time in the trenches in the Brooklyn Rackets division. You know, you can imagine what that life was like. And he had some long, hard days, as anybody that gets into this fight knows, because it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you're going to do anything to help prosecute organized crime or the mob, because they're out there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Don't forget, I like to ride motorcycles. I don't investigate organized crime anymore. I just research it. If you have a problem with PTSD and you've been in the service, be sure and go to that VA website. If you're on YouTube, I've got the screen grab of the website on the screen. If you have a problem with drugs or alcohol, which goes in hand with PTSD, be sure and check out Anthony Ruggiano. He has his own website. He's got a hotline number on that, and he's a drug and alcohol counselor down in Florida. So that would be cool. Have him be your drug and alcohol counselor. Don't forget to like and subscribe, punch that button down below. And if you're on YouTube, so you'll subscribe, and you can subscribe on the Apple Podcast app. Also, give me a review if you think about it. It's hard to figure out how to do. I know that. I love your comments on my YouTube channel, particularly. I really love your comments on that. I interact with a lot of people on that. Plus my Gangland Wire podcast Facebook group. And it's a private group now. It's got 60,000 people on it, and we get a lot of great stuff on there, a lot of great pictures, a lot of good conversation from people who are in the know, live the life, or live in the neighborhoods of the life. And if you can't figure out how to get to it through Facebook, get hold of me and we'll get you invited to it for sure. You just got to be on Facebook. And like and subscribe, like I said. And don't forget, keep coming back. I got a new podcast every week, and quite often I'll have a bonus episode in between. So thanks a lot, guys.